Welcome to Productive Joy with Dr. Christy, where fun meets action.
Hi, friends. Welcome to Productive Joy. I have such the honor today to talk to you and talk to mediocrity, who is the CEO of Aristotle Performance. But before we get into that, I have a couple requests. The first one is if you like what you're hearing on this podcast, could you please follow it? Because I don't know any other way to get this information out there, and that would be really, really great. And the second thing is tell me what you're enjoying. You are about to hear from yet another brilliant person, and I'm really hopeful that you're sharing this with everybody and then asking questions in the process. So let's get right into it. Neil, welcome. I am so glad you're here.
Thank you very much for having me. I really appreciate being here.
All right. So Neil, our relationship is an interesting one because we randomly met because your coworker found me on LinkedIn. Like it was a very random meeting, but that's been a little while. And before we can get into any of that, we need to know why people want to hear from you. So can you tell us in about 30 seconds to a minute why you're so awesome they should keep listening?
Well, I think I would never refer to myself as so awesome to begin with. I think I'm more humble than that. In part because, well, I hope I'm more humble than that. In part,
you definitely are. You definitely are.
Yeah. In part because I've spent so much of my life grinding and trying to make the lives of others better, trying to better myself in a way that accesses the kind of courage needed to lift others up and try to get them to see what they can become. And I think that's a central feature of good leadership, is trying to reveal to others what they can become.
Oh, there's power in those words. Encourage others to figure out who they can become. And I liked what you said about courage to lift others up. So how in the world do you do that? Like, say more.
How do you do that? Well, you lead a lot of people. I think the biggest thing is the relationship with responsibility that leaders have is that their responsibility isn't to the work, it's to the people, and their people are responsible for their work. So one of the things they're good at doing is not delegating tasks. What they're good at doing is delegating and enrolling people in responsibility and sharing that with them. And I think as you do that, you make a lot of mistakes and you forgive yourself for those mistakes. And then you realize that you're no worse a person because of mistakes. So you make more and you learn, and you make more and you learn, and you just make new mistakes. Just don't make the same mistakes. And as that evolution happens, as you take on the responsibility of trying to do that, you get better at it. And ultimately what you become is a better version of yourself. And that is the one chapter ahead in the book that leaders need to be to lead effectively.
A lot of power in your words already. And I think what you essentially just said is our mistakes are chances to learn, and that it is not our responsibility as leaders to lead the work. It's to lead the people to do the thing, whatever the thing is. So I mean, that didn't just happen. You didn't just fall into that definition. You didn't just discover that. You mentioned you've been a leader a long time. How did you get to the point where you knew that that was true? Or was it an innate thing that you then honed over time?
It's actually probably a more interesting story to me than anyone else, of course, because I've lived it. But at the end of the day, what happened was at 13 years old, I started in Army Cadets. And I'll never forget the first night that I was given my first section to lead. We all got chairs, we all sat down, and I said, how do we want to operate together?
You're 13.
I'm 13. This was the innate sort of egalitarian approach, in part because I didn't know what the hell else to say.
Right.
Like, you guys tell me how you want me to be. I think there was a little bit of fear in that, but also some knowing that that was a good way to lead. I was promptly dragged out of the drill hall, stood to attention outside, and yelled at.
Really?
You need to stand up and tell them how things are gonna be. And you tell them, you don't ask them. And then my drill sergeant turned and walked away, and then he came around and came back and he said, by the way, they sit, you stand. You're above them now. And what that was the edge of a long hill into working with foremen in different careers, managers that were psychologically sort of toxic for the sense of purpose, sense of self, um, sense of confidence, self-confidence. And ultimately, it worked with a lot of really challenging leaders that ultimately HR would have a heyday with in any context. But in that context, in that time, I mean, I don't look 40, but I am. And things were a little bit different 20 plus years ago in the way that people could behave towards each other in the workplace. And I was on the short end of the stick for quite a while and had always been a leader too. So not only was I watching leaders, I was emulating them. So I was getting good at being bad at leadership.
Yeah.
And that my training and development was how to get results at the cost of people, as opposed to the positive consequence or the positive outcome of people.
Yeah.
And that took a long time. And then eventually I had mentors that are such a key element. And I had a couple of mentors come into my life and just went like, you don't have to lead like this. And that started my journey back.
So you talked about this being a militant situation at 13. Do you think that was just an example of not knowing better, or was that truly just this is the only way you can lead in their minds, and then you finally found mentors that changed their mind?
It was absolutely an immature view of leadership. Because of the lack of the leadership, the young leaders that were in that situation turned to movies where violence and anger are glorified, sort of thing, and poor ways of communicating with people. And one of the things that I learned later is that you can actually be much more direct with people than you think you can be. But all great leaders have a mastery of the sidebar conversation.
Mm-hmm.
Every single person on the team knows that you're on their team.
Yeah.
You're on their side. You want to see them grow and develop. And if everyone knows that, everyone is willing to really go to the ends of their effort for you and for themselves, because they see the benefit that it has for not just themselves, for you, the leader, for the outcome, for the team. You're starting to build a community of team members. And a lot of that happens with the sidebar conversations where you're helping someone see what they can't yet see for themselves.
Well, and I think what you're ultimately saying is you've got to build relational capacity first. You have to know your people before you can lead your people. You have to know what they're good at, what they're not so good at. I talk a lot about leveraging relationships, but also leveraging talents and putting people in the right seats and on the right bus even. But you now get the opportunity to do this for a living. So I talk about you have to make every situation safe, logical, fun, and memorable. And when I say safe, I don't mean physically safe. I mean psychologically safe. And you taught me a lot of the psychological safety ideas that I knew to be true, but hadn't given a name. And so now that's what you do, right? You go all over the world and you help leaders create psychologically safe workplaces. Can you tell us more about that?
Yeah, I would say the biggest thing that happens with psychological safety is a lot of misunderstanding. People have this belief that it means safe spaces or being nice. When my daughter asked me what the difference between nice and kind was, and I said, nice is for you and kindness is for someone else.
Oh, nice is for you, kindness is for someone else. Interesting.
Yeah, and kindness requires courage. It requires an internal fortitude to be kind and care. Like you have to care and do something actionable about that caring. If you're just being nice, it's for you, not anybody else. It's a selfish act. And leaders always ride that edge. They're riding that edge where they're feeling courageous this is going to require a little bit of my courage all the time. It's like the imposter syndrome.
Mm-hmm.
When I work with leaders, it's like, good. Now we know that you're not some sort of narcissistic sociopath. This is
good.
You have this. Great. This also means that you're exploring new territory. There is an element where it gets to the point where you're not giving yourself enough credit as a human being. But it's not bad. If you're in the area of courage all the time, you're really pushing your boundaries all the time and trying to grow and be better. And people see that. And when you're doing that in the service of your team members, people feel that.
Yeah. No, they definitely do. And I feel it in your presence. You and I have had the opportunity to train together. You've trained me. And in that space, something that you do a really good job of is making things digestible, but then pushing people to think beyond maybe the way they've thought before. And I appreciate what you said about it doesn't mean safe spaces. It doesn't mean comfortable. It doesn't mean nice. It means that you are giving people a chance to make mistakes, to ask questions, to try new things, and not be stuck in the my way or the highway. When you are faced with leaders that are a little more like your original scoutmasters, I don't know what you called them. You didn't call them scoutmasters, but those guys who didn't know what they were doing. What do you do when you are faced with a toxic leader? Because I have a feeling there is at least one person listening to this who is faced with a toxic leader right now, and they don't know how to approach that to make it any better. So what do you do?
Yeah, well, okay, so I think this is a really interesting question because part of my specialization that took me to psychological safety was working with high performance toxic leaders.
Ah, like by title? Like,
yeah, like that was sort of my lane that I really started getting some traction in as an independent coach and consultant, right?
okay, wait, I have to press pause for a second because high performance toxic leaders, do they put that on their business card? Like how does
They
one
should.
know that they need your help?
Well, and that was the thing is that usually HR brought me in.
Ah, got it. Okay.
And this person is very valuable to the organization and they're causing enough damage that we got to do something about it now.
Got it. Okay. Okay.
So that's usually how I was brought into the organization. I mean, this is going back quite a little while ago now. And one of the things that I learned in my own journey of not doing very well as a leader for a good chunk of time was that I never woke up in the morning or I should say, wanting to cause harm.
Right.
Or wanting
Right.
to do a bad job. In fact, it was the exact opposite. And then as I gained mentorship and skills and training and things like that, and learned to go back to that youthful mindset that was much more in alignment with a productive outcome, what I learned was that people don't wake up in the morning wanting to do harm. So you have to tap into that side of them. And of all the leaders, several dozen leaders that I worked with, all of them, except for one, their problem was confidence and competence.
Say more about that.
So you just need skills.
Yeah.
Leadership is chronically undertrained in organizations. And typically the training that is received is not focused on character building. It's focused on some kind of competency or skill. And the problem with that is that those actually aren't helpful if you don't have the courage to go use them.
Yeah.
So what you need to teach people is the internal mechanisms of self-management, of emotional intelligence, self-awareness, self-confidence, courage, these kinds of elements, and then give them some practical, tactical things, how to create more accountability, for example. And it changes with the team, with the project, with the level. So those elements were very important, and really getting them to see that that's what was going on for them, that they weren't bad people. And that, like, removing the shame element for them was the pathway forward, because that was the biggest barrier to any conversation around behavior change.
Yeah.
Was if I have to assume the position of shame and guilt to say yes to change, I'm not going to do it.
Yeah.
You remove that barrier and say, look, you don't have to feel shame and guilt. You just have to acknowledge that this is something that we can do something about. And are you willing to? Yes. Okay. Let's do it.
Well, you've given us a masterclass already in just how to become a better leader. And I agree with you wholeheartedly. The phrase I use is that people don't wake up in the morning and say, I want to suck at my job today. And they don't, right? They want to be great. But if we don't have the right tools in our tool belt, then we fail at that. And I think that that's not fun, right? And so to shift gears a little, because I want people to go find you and learn from you. And I don't want you to give away all of your secrets in the next 30 minutes, although I'm going to have you back because there are an awful lot of things that we could talk about. But If you had to shift gears a little and describe productive joy, this podcast is called Productive Joy because I feel strongly that it is very difficult to be productive without joy. That's my definition, but I would like to know yours. When you hear productive joy, what does that make you think of?
I think it makes me think about falling in love with the journey.
Mm,
When I say that, like, I've it's funny because I've led several hundred teams, and like you do the math on that. I'm 40.
yeah, it's impressive.
How the hell do you even do that? Well, you go from city to city, and you work in an industry where I would get 4 teams in the morning, and we'd have to assign work and develop relationships to get work done well. You got to know your people if you're going to get the best out of them. And then their 8 hours is up, and you get 4 more.
That's
and
a
I
lot.
would work 16 or 17-hour day. It wasn't uncommon for us to work 21-hour days when I was working on the road. And you just see a lot of human beings. You see what drives them. You see that we are more primal than we are human.
Yeah.
If you take a human being and put them in a context, they're going to behave a certain way because we have innate needs and desires as human beings. And like, that's all okay. That journey led me to where I am now. And I didn't love it then. That wasn't what I would call productive joy.
Okay.
It had its moments of productive joy. But in reflection, I can appreciate the journey. And as I reflect on that journey, it reminds me to appreciate the journey I have now, which is not easy because I push myself to that edge of imposter syndrome. I push myself to that edge of courage all the time. It's there where I find joy because that's where I'm doing my best to better myself in the service of others.
Thank you. Thank you for such a clear picture of the difference, right? You told me before we started that you struggle with that question a little bit because it is about the journey, right? And it isn't about arriving. And some days we are more struggly than others. That's a new word I just made up. Did you like that? But the struggle is where the production comes from, where the productiveness happens. And if we're not struggling, we're really not learning, we're not pushing, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I would agree with that. And I think that there's a question posed to me this morning, or a comment said to me this morning, I should say, that was business is faster than it's ever been before.
Mm-hmm.
And I said, what is faster? Because when I came into corporate life, what I was shocked with was how slow things happened.
It's true. To actually make a change. Yeah.
Yeah. So like, what are people talking about? This like speed of anything, speed of trust? Like there's no speed. I don't see speed anywhere. I didn't understand. And what I've come to believe is that part of the reason why we feel like it's super fast is not because it's fast, but because it never ends.
Yeah. Oh,
so it always just feels like it's coming. It's still coming. So if you can't keep up, well, there is no keeping up.
Yeah.
You can't keep up and it's too fast. And okay. So you have to change the game a little bit. You have to give yourself benchmarks, blocks of time to accomplish things. Yes. But more than anything, acknowledge that you've done things.
Yeah. So I don't know.
People get stuck on productivity. They don't feel productive. They don't feel like it ever ends. The hamster wheel of leadership, the courage that it took to have a challenging conversation. People don't acknowledge that when it's done.
Right.
They stress out about it when it hasn't happened yet.
So have you read the book, The Gap and the Gain?
No, I have not. No.
So what you just described is really that book in a nutshell. It's for high achieving people who struggle to recognize when they have done something productive. And so most of our lives, I know, right? Like literally the name of the book. But most of our lives is spent in the gap, meaning I have not reached this pinnacle that I have created for myself when I am the CEO, when I am the whatever. And instead of celebrating what happens each day to get you to that unrealistic thing that you have set for yourself up here, it's not that the thing itself is unrealistic, but you can't get there in a day. So you have to live in the gain, which is I had the tough conversation. I got a little bit better at that thing. I attended my daughter's recital. I did these things. And if we don't celebrate the gain, then we're always in the gap. And our high achieving friends feel like they haven't accomplished what they needed to accomplish because their entire life is spent striving for something that's unattainable today, this day. And they really struggle to ever get there. So deep thoughts by Neil Pretty today.
I mean, I think it is something that I'm asked to do a lot, is sort of have these deeper thoughts, in part because organizations come to us and ask, we want to become a learning organization. And the inevitable question back is, what the hell does that mean?
What do you want to learn?
I mean, my business partner, Jason Eisner, he often says, people want to become a learning organization. To do that, you have to learn.
Yeah.
And your tolerance for difference becomes imperative, because you have to be willing to put down what you thought you knew, and pick up something that you now know to be different.
Ooh.
It's really, really uncomfortable. Courage is a key part of this, but it's like that the courage to let go of what you thought was right in the past is so critical. But you do that by doing that. You don't do that by thinking about it and maybe getting other people to do that. Just go do it.
Yeah.
Challenge your own thinking. Create environments where you might be wrong, and it's okay if you are.
So if people are listening to you right now, then they are hearing all the things they need to know, but maybe have never been able to quantify, never been able to put into words. The listeners are people who are leading others in some capacity. And as they listen to what you are saying, I think they're walking away with a whole lot of great ideas. If you could give them one great idea that if you do this one thing, you're going to see difference, could you do that? What would your one thing be?
Start from the perspective that you could be wrong.
Oh.
And that's okay. Like it's outside of yourself. Like you aren't a wrong or bad person. But start from the perspective that there's a possibility that you could be wrong. And the next layer to that is to consider that there is much more going on than who's right and who's wrong.
Yeah.
Consider those things. And if you're able to come from that space, a whole world of possibility opens up. The antithesis of that is to be exceedingly curious and seek opportunities to have your mind blown. So my daughter's 8, and she asked me what the difference between nice and kind was. And I said, nice is for yourself and kindness is for someone else, and requires courage to get there. And that required me to look into it. What is the definition? Okay, well, how do I explain this to an 8? Well, she was 7 at the time. How do I explain this to a 7-year-old? How do I put this into terms that I also agree with? What are all these things? And she asked all kinds of questions, but I'm also very curious about the world.
Yeah.
Regularly seek opportunities to have my mind blown. That builds that capacity for difference. That builds that capacity to sit in a room, be wrong, and not blame yourself or shame yourself for being incorrect. All of these things, those two practices, I think, of all of those two things are really critical for leadership, because then you can grow.
Yeah, because you know yourself well enough to have the capacity to know others and not be intimidated by others. Because you said the number one reason why leaders were toxic is because they were too afraid. They didn't have the right confidence to be able to act accordingly. And I know you exude that. I've watched it happen. I've seen it happen both organically and just as part of the training itself. And it's pretty beautiful to see, for sure. So I'm pretty sure we could talk for 2 hours, but I'm also pretty sure that people need to go find you. So before I tell them how to find you, I have a couple rapid fire questions. Are you okay with that?
You bet.
Are you excited? Okay. So
I am.
What is your definition of fun?
Adrenaline.
Say more.
Yeah. Mountain biking, skiing, anything that gets my blood pumping real hard.
Okay.
Yeah.
Straight adrenaline. So you're a little bit of an adrenaline junkie.
Yeah, I didn't realize that I was until somebody pointed out to me many, many years later. And part of the reason why I never said that I was because I came up in an industry and and have worked with people who are like really, really hardcore adrenaline junkies, and they're terrifying from my perspective. So it's all perspective. But
So you're like a baby adrenaline junkie, and they're like,
yeah,
Smack Daddy.
fair to midline, yeah.
Okay. So how do you know that you're showing up as your authentic self?
I don't think about it.
Yeah.
It's not that something's present. It's an absence. Yeah, it's an absence of concern or fear. It is that psychologically safe environment.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Huh. Oh, good answer. Good answer. Okay. How do you channel your best self on your worst days?
Oh, that's a good question. How do I channel my best self on my worst days? Oh, that's a really tough question to answer. I mean, get cold. Go get a cold tub, something like that.
So like a reset? You need a reset?
Yeah, there's some kind of like physical way of exerting myself is the most productive. And I think part of that is like on my worst day, the best thing I can do is give myself a very clear demonstration of accomplishment.
So you live in the game.
Something that like shows some kind of capability. I'm good with a kettlebell. I can sit in the cold for a long time, and I can push myself really hard in that kind of environment. So it's like you can get a sense of accomplishment for that. And I think that's a really important element that people often don't know how to do for themselves, is give themselves a sense of accomplishment that makes you feel empowered. And yeah, I think that's on my worst days, that's how I show up as my best self.
I love it. Okay, final question. And I kind of asked it, but I'm going to ask it a slightly different way. You've said so many things, so many really great things that people need to digest and maybe listen more than once and grab. But if they can only remember one, thing that you said, what's the one thing that you want people to remember about today?
I don't know if I fully articulated it, but I want people to take this away. If you want trust, give trust. If you want psychological safety, give psychological safety. If you want empathy, give empathy, particularly regarding toxic leaders. If you want service, you have to offer service. If you want respect, you have to give respect. It goes out before it comes in.
Neil, you nailed it, friend. And it was exactly what I thought it would be when I asked you if you would be willing to be on my podcast. Thank you for choosing to share your time with us today. And thank you for choosing to share your wisdom, not just with us, but with leaders all over the world who want to get better at who they are and what they do. So well done. And friends, thank you for being here. I need them to know how to find you, Neil. I mean, yes, they can look up Aristotle Performance, but let's be more specific. How might somebody find you so that you can fix them? Okay, maybe not fix them, but you know what I mean.
Yeah, I know. I do know what you mean. LinkedIn is the best way to connect with me, or just Neil at aristotleperformance.com.
Spell Neil, because you can spell Neil more than one way.
Certainly Neil. Yeah.
Perfect. Well, thank you, Neil. And friends, if you enjoyed this, I hope that you will share it. It definitely was one that I will be listening to again and again because I need these reminders as well. So my biggest goal in doing this podcast is to make sure you have a nugget or two of wisdom that you can use so that you can turn fun into action.